to Maypac's mom. YouTube and check key. M.E.G. Remix.
គ្នាឆាប់ទូយ៉ាងណាមិនដែលជ្រាបជ្រែកអូនឡើយប្រត្រឹមការភ្នែកបង្ហាញចម្លើយថាបងចង់បានអូនណាំងមានអារម្មណ៍ទេពេលដែលមកតែងលួចបាំងអារម្មណ៍នោះមកព្រៀបអ្នកខ្លាំងអាចឲ្យអូនខ្លាំងបដូរចិនបានទេសំរំធ្វើមូលាលៀមបានទេកំសគួរមានមេពេលអូនមកគ្នាសុំអារម្មណ៍ណាពងងារតែតែគេទៅទៀតចុងសុំធ្វើជាមនុស្សប្រលាក់លៀមខំបានទេពេលគេចោលគេឬក៏ឆាប់មកលេងពេលអូនអំសុំឬក៏ពេលការតុងឬគេធ្វើឲ្យអូនស្មុំសុំចាំទុំនោះប្រលាក់លៀមនៅរងចាំអូនបងតែងគិតអូនពិតមានចិត្តលើបងតែអូនមិនអាចធ្វើរឿងខុសឆ្គងរំលងនោះអដូចគេបងអាចរងចាំបានមិនធ្វើនោះទេរាប់អានស្គាល់ចិត្តសិនក៏បានដែរមុនមិត្តប្រែជាសង្សារលួចស្រឡាញ់អូនគឺស្រឡាញ់ចេញពីចិត្តមិនមែនគិតវាយដំឡាយអូនលេងសើចនឹងស្ងួនដូចប្រងដតីសំរំធ្វើមូលាលៀមបានទេកំសគួរមានមេពេលអូនមកគ្នាកុំអារម្មណ៍ណាពងងារតែគេទៅទៀតចុងសុំធ្វើជាមនុស្សប្រលាក់លៀមខំបានទេពេលគេចោលគេឬក៏ឆាប់មកលេងពេលអូនអត់សុំឬក៏ពេលការទុំឬគេធ្វើឲ្យអូនស្មុំសុំចាំទុំនោះប្រលាក់លៀមនៅរងចាំនៅពីសងចង់យកពីបងឡងមកស្ដាអូនណាំងទូពេលនេះរូបអូនមានចាំស្នេហ៍មិនខ្លាំងនៅតែដូចដើមសំរំធ្វើមូលាលៀមបានទេកំសគួរមានមេពេលអូនមកគ្នាគុំអារម្មណ៍ណាពងងារតែតែគេទៅទៀតចុងសុំធ្វើជាមនុស្សប្រលាក់លៀមខំបានទេពេលគេចោលគេឬក៏ឆាប់មកលេងពេលអូនអំសុំឬក៏ពេលការតុងឬគេធ្វើឲ្យអូនស្មុំសុំចាំទុំនោះប្រលាក់លៀមនៅរងចាំអូន សំរំធ្វើមូលាលៀមបានទេកំសគួរមានមេ អូនគឺជាមនុស្សដំបងដែលបងស្រឡាញ់ខ្លាំង រនាងខាងខាន់ក្តីស្នេហ៍មួយនេះយើងខំត្រដោស្មុំសបាយត្រេវបងហើយចិត្តយើងទាំងពីរឲ្យឃ្លាតជីវីគ្មានទីណាអាចជួបជុំនឹកអូនពេញសំឡឹងមើលមេឃទឹកភ្នែកបងចិត្តធ្ងុយធ្ងរអង្វរឲ្យអូនត្រឡប់មកវិញអូនមិនអាចឃ្លានពីបងវិលមកក្បែរមនុស្សដែលអូនស្រឡាញ់ក្នុងចិត្តតូនតែងអូនសំឡាញ់វិលវិញបានទេលឺអបងអើយអូនឃ្លាតឆ្ងាយហើយគ្មានសង្ឃឹមឡើយបានជួបត្រង់ដងទីបេះដូងមួយនេះដល់បាយជាពីគ្រប់វិញនាទីនឹងដល់នារីលៀងចាប់ពីថ្ងៃនេះទៅបងត្រូវរៀនรู้ម្នាក់ភាពសោកសង្រេងឲ្យបងបានស្គាល់ពីភាពឈឺ
អ There's no such thing as a perfect writer. This is why I use Grammarly to check my work.
If I'm putting
What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and to say the GTX 1650 received poor reviews when it first launched would be a bit of an understatement. Pretty much everything I read and watched around the 1650 basically said that it was a good card, but very overpriced. For less money, you could get an RX 570 that in many cases outperformed the 1650. Sure, the 1650 does offer better power efficiency and doesn't require any external PCIe power connectors, but the situations where that's absolutely necessary are few and far between. Because of all this, the general consensus was that buying a GTX 1650 was a bad solid low progress in performance the 1650 with the intention of popping. This Dell Optiplex is a good example of the type of system someone might pop this into, as even though it is old, paired with a good upgrade slim pre-builds, they really only have low profile cards as an option. The other reason someone may want to get a 1650 like this one is to be used in a compact ITX build. For example, I did a Ryzen 3 ITX build with a low profile GTX 1050, and that build was relatively affordable for how small it was. At only 7 liters in volume, it could easily fit into a backpack, making it very portable. Normally, to get a system that small with a dedicated GPU, you would need to get something like a DAN case, which runs you well over $200 for the case alone. Going with low profile cards can save a fair bit of coin when building a small form factor system, so as you can see, going with a low profile card may be a good choice in a few different situations. So let's bring our attention back to this card. It comes in a pretty typical graphics card box. Opening it up, we find a driver disc, the card itself wrapped up in anti-static bubble wrap, and the low profile IO bracket. By default, the full height bracket is installed, but switching over is pretty easy. Taking a look at the card, we find what I consider to be a pretty good looking low profile graphics card. It has a dark gray plastic shroud with 2 black 80mm fans and a black PCB. Most of the cases you'll use this in aren't going to allow for visibility of the card, but making it look nice certainly doesn't hurt. The heatsink looks pretty basic, but it does a fine job of keeping the card cool in normal situations. I'm not sure if there is any copper in it, but from the outside it just appears to be a big hunk of aluminum with a few fins. Installing this card is super simple. If you're putting this in a normal PC case, which please don't, that's not the purpose of this card, all you have to do is free up the 16x PCIe slot on your motherboard, press the card into place, and screw in the IO bracket to secure the card. This is it, as there's no external PCIe connectors required. To install it into a slim desktop like the Dell I showed off earlier, you first need to install the low profile bracket. To do this, you have to remove 2 screws and 2 standoffs for the DVI port. To remove these 2 standoffs, I used a nut driver bit on my driver kit, but using a pair of pliers to get them loose, then hand unscrewing them would work fine also. Once these are out, you remove the 2 screws holding the bracket on that sandwich the PCB and bracket together. Once removed, the full height bracket comes off easily and the half height one slips right on. Then you just replace the 2 screws and the 2 standoffs and you're ready to install the card. In this Dell, I just open up the side panel, unclip this expansion retention clip, press the card into place, then I flip the clip back into place and put the panel back on. This is super simple even for those not tech savvy, and can turn an old boring office PC into a pretty capable gaming machine, assuming they already have a decent CPU like an i5-2400 and 8GB of RAM in their system. In terms of the specs of this GTX 1650, it has the exact same specifications as any other GTX 1650 and has the same base and almost the same boost clock as Zotac's full-size GTX 1650. In terms of testing, I really only tested a few games. I tested in a full-size tower with the panel off to simulate a best case scenario, and I plan to put it inside of the Optiplex to simulate a worst case scenario, but had to settle for a different small form factor case, and I'll explain why later. The larger system I tested in is the $600 gaming PC I recently did a video on. I tested with this because it's probably the most powerful hardware someone might pair with this GPU. Inside the system is a Ryzen 5 2600 and 16GB of 3000 MHz DDR4 RAM. Obviously this isn't the most powerful system ever, but it makes sure the 1650 isn't being bottlenecked in any significant way. I tested 4 games, 2 AAA games, and 2 esports titles. I started out with Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings. This little guy put out an average of 182 FPS with 1% lows of 124. This was a really great experience, and locking things at 144 FPS would probably give less fluctuations in frame rate. In Rainbow Six Siege at 1080p high settings, the system on to 2 more difficult to run games, starting with Borderlands 3 at 1080p high set, 1080p average optical IQ of relatively limited form as good as most any other GTX 1650 on. This card received an average of 57 of relative stone ML09 with experience in lock-ins 2 AAA. In this demo, I just open up the side panel, unclip this expansion retention clip, press the card into place, then I flip applications at 2 games. I tested in a full shader. The larger system I tested with gigabytes of Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings. This little guy put out an average of 182 FPS with 1% lows of 1. What's going on, guys? My name is Matt. I was searching to see how much GTX 1050 sample. It seems that 1 in every 5 that are sold on eBay are flat out counterfeits. I tried to pick trade takes the quick 2-minute trade partner, but actually a lot of these listings are from US based sellers. Take this one for example, is coming from California. This listing is particularly fit the picture cards, but the seller decided to add a picture of Game of Thrones, a book/TV card, and this card. So the card took a little small in it, which putting the card to the back, I found a sticker that states that this is in fact a 2GB GTX 1050 Ti. This was the only labeling on the card other than the 2 stickers on the front of the fans with Chinese lettering. I tried to translate this but couldn't really get anything useful or accurate from the app I was using. So if you can read this and are able to translate it to English, let me know what it says in the comment section down below. A quick glance at this card makes you think it's a pretty normal dual fan graphics card that could very well be a 1050 Ti. But once you start to look a little closer, one thing after another starts popping up. Firstly, beyond 1050 Ti's not having 2GB of video memory, I also don't think I've ever seen one with a VGA port. I don't even remember any 900 series NVIDIA cards having VGA, let alone a 1000 series card. The cooler appears to be just a big hunk of aluminum with some extruded fins. I doubt there is any copper in this, but we'll open it up and find out later in the video. There's this weird metal bracket that spans the length of the card's PCB. Not sure what that's for. And finally, there are memory modules mounted on the back of the PC, not something I've ever remember seeing on my other cards I've owned. This is weird because many times there are cracked the cap out of $50 is a great price, a huge deal, and is just I then tried another game, maybe Fortnite was just a fluke. How about something? Scammers can counterfeit stickers to say this is a stealth. To open the card up, all I had to do was remove the cooler and confirmed when looking at the cooler. This is just a big hunk of aluminum, which for the record isn't the end of the head, and used alcohol wipes to remove the thermal paste from the GPU die and the cooler. This revealed the text on the GPU die which read GF116-200-KA-A1. If you take this, usually came with isn't I 1050 Ti thing, so I don't actually play any game. Many times when buying used mining cards for gaming, they will come with a custom mining program. Select the BIOS file you want to flash, work. So I reapplied the thermal to prevent pollutions. I put the software up, I had to wait in. I found a USB main board, an adapter board, an alligator clip, and a few other parts. To flash the BIOS with this method, I again had to remove the GPU, open it up, and for good measure, remove the old thermal paste again. The way this works is the alligator clip attaches to the BIOS chip on the graphics card PCB, the cable attaches to this adapter board, the adapter board plugs into the USB main board, and that USB plugs into your computer. The only problem is that there weren't many instructions on how to orient each of these connectors, and I wasn't really sure which chip on the card was for the BIOS. I spent a number of bested me, and it now will popular esports games. If they can't use external PCIe power, then they can pick up a 2GB.
This is Tyler. Tyler, with Grammarly's help, is writing an email to his boss, Anita. Tyler sits just 15 feet away, though it can feel like the distance to Antarctica, approximately 47 million feet. Tyler desperately wants Anita to like him, but doesn't want to sound unsure of himself. He also wants to explain the incident at the elevator. But this probably isn't the email for that. It's an email asking to lead a team workshop because more collaboration would be really helpful, beneficial. But Tyler worries that Anita doesn't think he's confident, especially after the time he told her,
"I'm a suppository of information."
and she gave him this look, since he clearly didn't know what a suppository was. This time, Tyler is determined to find the right words, the ones that will connect best with Anita, so that when Tyler sends his email, he receives a response in just 4 minutes and 12 seconds. that includes phrases like, "I'm impressed," and "such initiative." And the distance between Tyler and Anita stops feeling so far. Grammarly, helping you connect. Go to Grammarly.com to download.
But is on the much newer AMD Polaris Arc at $20 back in 2017. This was during the mining craze when RX 480s were selling for like $400 or $500. The GT 1030 is super power efficient at a TDP of 35 watts and even comes in single forms exactly silently Ryzen 7 test bench with 16GB of DDR4. This way I was able to eliminate pretty much any CPU bottleneck for the best picture as to how these graphics cards perform. I tested 5 different games. These games include Far Cry 5, Rainbow Six Siege, Fortnite, PUBG, and GTA 5. I think this is a pretty good range of games, but if there's a game you'd like to see me test in future videos, go ahead and leave your suggestion in the comment section down below. Starting things off with Rainbow Six Siege at 1080p medium settings, I found the GTX 760 slightly beats out the RX 460 by about 15%, with the 1030 scoring the lowest and the only card to be below 60 FPS. Suggestion in the comment section down below. Starting things off with Rainbow Six Siege at 1080p slightly outperform the GTX 760 by a few FPS, which is a good example of how game optimization may favor 160 by a few FPS, which is a good example of how game optimization slightly beats out the RX 460 by about 15%, with the 1030 scoring the lowest and the only card to be below 60 FPS average. Next up is Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, which I'll throw the settings up on the 60 and the 1030. Moving on to Far Cry 4 on both the RX 460 and the 1030. As before, the RX 460 actually slightly outperformed the GTX 760 by a few FPS, which is a good example of how game optimization may favor one card over another. Moving on to PUBG, this is actually where the biggest performance disparity was found. At 1080p low settings, the GTX 760 was considerably faster than the RX 460, and the 760 was the only graphics card able to average above 60 FPS. The final game tested was GTA 5, and this ended up following the trend we saw earlier, with the GTX 760 outperforming the RX 460 by a slight margin. As you can see, for $50, the GTX 760 performs pretty darn well, being able to play popular esports titles at 60 FPS or above. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. Should you pick up this GTX 760 over something like the RX 460? Well, if you already have a power supply that is supplemental PCIe power, then it's a no-brainer for me. But if you just want to take your old system and slap a card into it, then the RX 460 might be right for you. The GTX 760 is a good deal at $50, and if all you're playing is stuff like Fortnite, then this card will work like a dream. But if you're wanting to play more modern titles, paying $25 or $30 more for an RX 460 would be a good way to go in my opinion. In terms of the GT 1030, unless you need a half-height single slot card or absolutely need the low power draw, then I don't really see any good reason to pick one up. Overall, these AliExpress 760s are legit and are a pretty good option for someone who just wants to grab something quick and doesn't want a deal hunt. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up, as well as consider subscribing for more PC and tech related content in the future. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.